Joining me now is Arsalan Iftikhar, international human rights lawyer, media commentator, and senior editor of the Islamic Monthly. He is also author of the book, Islamic Pacifism, Global Muslims in the Post-Osama Era. Welcome to the show. Let me get your reaction when you heard about the bombing. Was it a deep sense of dread?
It was. I think whenever we see an act of mass murder like this occur here on American soil, what millions of American Muslims fear always is, please God, don't let it be a Muslim. And the reason for that is, even though we recently had the Newtown, Connecticut school shooting, we had the Aurora, Colorado Dark Night massacre, both which were committed by white males, when we see an act of mass murder being perpetrated by Muslim men in this country, it seems as though the term terrorism has been co-opted only to apply when Muslim men with foreign-sounding names commit an act. And so I think that millions of Muslims around the country did feel a sense of dread. But again, we don't own this act any more than Christians should own the Timothy McVeigh Oklahoma City bombing. But sadly, when it comes to collective guilt in this country, American Muslims feel the brunt of it. Is
it the media? Do they want this box? They want to create this box and shove it in there? Because we did hear these erroneous reports. I saw John Miller on CBS saying, we got to be careful about this, but there's a dark-skinned man being questioned. And then we heard John King say that there was a dark-skinned man who was being arrested. And I think we know what that means, don't we?
We do, and the narrative on the entire situation was kind of created then, when CNN and other outlets reported erroneously that a dark-skinned male had been arrested. To the general American public, it sent that message of, oh, well, it's the other guys, that have done this. But, again, we cannot ignore the fact that, these were two brothers who are ethnic Chechens and who were Muslim. This is something that the Muslim community in the United States, and particularly in Boston, have dealt with. The Islamic Society of Boston, which is the major mosque in the area, actually had kicked out the older brother once because he started screaming during a Friday sermon when the imam praised the civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King. So, there has been a lot of efforts in the Muslim community to weed out these sorts of radicals. And, Muslims condemn this act just like anyone else. There were Muslim runners in the Boston Marathon. There were Muslim victims of the Boston Marathon bombing. And so, we grieve and we're healing just like all other Americans.
There's the flip side of this, though. Wouldn't you say that the media then immediately goes into damage control and almost does this act of contrition, and obviously they reach out to you, get you on the air to say, hey, time out, don't jump to any conclusions. James Woolsey was on our broadcast and said this creates a whole nother problem, which is the fact of the matter that these are Islamic jihadists, as he said. And Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, said the same thing. We've got to step up our game, and that there's this political correctness that kind of comes over us. How would you respond to that?
Well, I respond to that by saying that, when we saw the Newtown, Connecticut school shooting or the Aurora, Colorado Dark Night massacre, we didn't see these Republican political officials come out and call for the racial profiling of all young white males. Sadly, it's only when Muslims or Arabs or South Asians commit an act of terrorism that we call for that. What most Americans forget is the fact that less than a year ago in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, there was a white supremacist named Wade Michael Page who walked into an Indian Sikh temple and slaughtered 6 people in cold blood. Now, had a brown man gone into a white church in Wisconsin and killed 6 people, our media would have called it terrorism. But because he was a white guy, he was just a crazy loner. And so there is a double standard here, and I think that some political opportunists are taking advantage of that right now when we need to come together as Americans, in this time of healing.
And in that case, Adam Lanza, you brought up Timothy McVeigh. I think you could probably defy anyone watching this program to ask them, what religion are these guys? They wouldn't be able to tell you, would they?
Yeah, and what several studies have found is, the vast majority of domestic terrorist attacks that occur on American soil, over 90% of them, are committed by white domestic males. A few years ago, we had a 48-year-old man who was a member of the Tea Party named Joe Stack, who decided to fly his single-engine plane into the IRS building in Austin, Texas. Now, I assure you, if a brown man had flown his plane into an IRS building in Austin, Texas, we would have shut down every IRS building and probably every other federal building in America also. And so again, in our American societal vernacular, the term terrorism has to apply to all people. It has to apply to everyone, regardless of their race, religion, or ethnicity.
I asked you about your sense of dread, and it's one obviously shared within the community, and for good reasons. After September 11th, there was a backlash. There were incidents, they're well detailed. What's your fear about this one?
Well, my fear is actually, a reality. A few days after the Boston Marathon bombings, there was a Palestinian Muslim woman in Boston who was walking with her child, and because she wears the hijab, the headscarf, she was actually accosted by a man who yelled, "F you Muslims, you guys did the Boston Marathon bombings." A day after the bombings in New York City, there was a man who was leaving a New York City mosque, and he was followed by an armed man yelling anti-Muslim slurs. And so, hate crimes and discrimination are real. And for anybody who says that, these are isolated incidents is apparently not living in any sort of reality.
But we hear from moderates like yourself after these incidents. There are some who say that you aren't vocal enough prior to. What would you respond to that?
For people who say that Muslims don't condemn terrorism enough, I challenge them to go to Google and type in the words "Muslims condemn terrorism." You will get over 1.68 million hits. Just the fact that they're not listening or the media is not portraying our message of condemnation doesn't mean that we're not doing it. Just go to Google, type in "Muslims condemn terrorism," and you're going to get over 1 million hits.
Then there are the other arguments that this really doesn't have much to do with religion. It has a lot to do with politics and policy. And earlier this week, there was a testimony from Farai al-Muslimi, I believe is how you say it. He's from Yemen, and he was talking about a drone strike in a village that he came from, Wasab. And he said, six days ago, my village was struck by a drone in an attack that terrified thousands of simple, poor farmers. The drone strike and its impact tore my heart, much as the tragic bombings in Boston last week tore your hearts and also mine. He said that the radicals couldn't impact the people in this village, but the actions of one drone could. And he said now he loves America, but he's fearful about going back to Yemen because people might take it out on him. Is that a problem that people don't really look at the larger policy issues and something as simple as these drone strikes? They don't even think about it.
Well, that's a very good question, Mike. And at the end of the day, foreign policy can be debated ad nauseum. The fact is, with these two brothers, these were isolated loner losers who essentially decided to create and commit an act of mass murder on their own. I mean, at the end of the day, this is something that, not only do Muslims condemn categorically, but is more akin to actually street gangs here in America. Here you have isolated lone wolves who, don't have any sense of belonging in their neighborhoods or in their society. And, they decide to, commit these dumb and irreligious acts. And, in this case, the FBI has said that, it's the great probability that they acted on their own, that they weren't radicalized based on any sort of, geopolitical global group. And, that they have to be called for what they are, and that's just murderers.
The gentleman who died, there's been talk about how there will not be an Islamic burial because the mosque is afraid of doing that. What are your thoughts about that?
That's actually a very good question, Mike. And what most people need to understand is that in an Islamic traditional burial, you pray over the body of the person who's being buried. Now, after the 2008 terrorist attacks in Mumbai, India, the Indian community, the Muslim community in India actually took a very strong stand, and they actually refused to bury the Mumbai attackers, calling them a, quote, stain on our religion. And so, I wouldn't be surprised at all, if the Boston community did the same thing in this case as well.
Let's talk a little bit about this case in Toronto, because it was a Muslim imam who tipped off the authorities there. Yeah. There's been another case which was out in Southern California where the FBI sent an informant into this mosque, right, and he was talking about radical Islam. And actually, the mosque members themselves, yeah, went to the police, got a restraining order against this guy. And I think that's the disconnect. People don't see, it gets back to the moderates. You say you can type in Google, but people aren't doing that.
Well, they should. I mean, that's just laziness on their part. But you bring up a really good point. When it comes to mainstream Muslims, we obviously try to be good and active citizens of our society. And in the recent case in Canada, even the Royal Canadian Mounted Police have acknowledged the fact that it was actually Muslims who helped foil that plot. There have been as many foiled plots that have been tipped off by the Muslim community here in America than there haven't. And so, we have worked closely with law enforcement agencies on the ground in our grassroots communities to open our mosque doors, Islamic center doors, to let people know interfaith dialogue has increased 10 or 20-fold since September 11th. And so, you know, we're going to continue to be contributing members of American society and, you know, call a spade wherever we see it.
Well, thank you so much for coming in and joining us
It was
here
my
on The Heat.
pleasure, Mike. Thank you.